Hello, everyone. Happy spring and welcome to this week's episode of Empowering Musicians podcast. I am your host, Michael Manley, and I'm very happy to welcome my good friend Edmund Velasco to this week's episode. And Edmund is, in addition to being just a really amazing labor leader and advocate for working musicians, is a accomplished professional jazz saxophone player who also spent many years working at Disneyland as a performing musician, and has several CDs with his jazz quartet. And I'm just really happy to welcome you to the podcast today, Edmund.
Oh, it's great to be here, Michael. I've been looking forward to it. I've actually enjoyed your podcast quite a bit.
Well, awesome. I'm so glad you watch. I don't, it's hard to know live who's watching. So I'm really always pleasantly surprised when people say they've checked it out. So thanks for checking it out and thanks for being a guest. Edmund's also a connoisseur of bespoke jackets like I am. And, but as you can tell, is wearing a festive shirt today. For those of you watching, there we go. Love it. So welcome, Edmund. So tell us a little bit about how you got started as a working jazz saxophone player and what your early career was like.
My early career was a lot of big bands. I played a lot of, things like In the Mood, String of Pearls. I mean, there was a point in my life where I could probably play all the old standards without even opening the book. Wow. It was just, you play those things so much. And, the dancers loved it. After a while, you're pretty much tired of it. But I think that's really when I started working at Disney, it gave me the financial freedom to be able to start really focusing on my jazz career, because I had just gotten married, and I knew that I had to support a wife. Well, we were supporting each other, but I had to figure out how to make a living, which the Disney gig actually let me do. But, it was a job, which is fine. My jazz stuff, I've always written jazz music, jazz tunes. Okay. And I got a chance to, with a local jazz club, write tunes, perform with my quintet. And pretty soon we were touring Europe and parts of the United States. Yeah, and it was great. It was so much fun. Those guys, I really, I enjoyed playing with them, and I still do to this day. So.
Oh, that's awesome. So what year did you start at Disney, just to give me some perspective here?
My first gig there was October of '89.
Wow, that's a while ago, but you were there for some of the really interesting years, I'm sure. And you're talking about having what I would refer to as an anchor job, right? Like,
yeah.
So, and folks wonder sometimes, like, well, what do musicians do? Like, are they just going to play up and down the street every day, and doesn't that get old or whatever, or play the same Broadway show over and over again? And the answer, I think, is sort of it gets old, but at the same time, it gives you freedom to do other things artistically, because it is a solid, reliable, full-time employment. And was your work was unionized all the way back then, right? You guys had a union contract even in '89.
Oh yeah, I mean, the union contract for Disney goes back to, I believe, the park opened in '55. I think the first contract was '59. The collective bargaining agreement. They'd had contracts, like the original Disneyland band to open the park was there from the day one. And it's because Walt really insisted that there be a town band in Town Square. In fact, there was even a gazebo for them to perform. And back then, they did all they could play were marches that everybody had memorized, because they didn't even have music. So eventually they spent money and they got music. It was more, the contract got extended beyond the first 2 weeks. Pretty soon there was a collective bargaining agreement. And then, so I think it was 58 or 59 that was signed. And it's been an agreement ever since.
Wow. And so what was your role at Disney? What were you doing in your 28 years there as an employee?
I got started in a brand new band, the Disneyland Big Band, which played at Carnation Plaza, and it was to replace a lot of the ghost bands that were going in, because a lot of the ghost bands, the leaders had died. So it was basically the same band, same guys coming into the band but with a different leader. But it was the same guys in the. I mean, all the guys did all the work, were doing that work anyway. They were just bringing in new leaders. So Disney decided, well, we could put our own big band together because we have the charts, we have the musicians, we can audition for it. And the funny thing is that I got a call that there was an audition for Disney, and I was going to Cal State Long Beach at the time. Okay. And I decided, well, there's going to be a lot of guys who are going for that gig. I'm not going to audition. I want to focus on my degree and get it done. And one of my friends who was going to Cal State Long Beach at the time was helping the guy putting the band together. So the day after the auditions, this guy gave me a call, and his name was Woody Kane. And he said, Edmund, why didn't you show up to the auditions? And I said, well, I figured there's going to be a lot of guys who are going to be going for that. And, I'm still working on my stuff. He goes, man, no, we needed you to audition. Can you show up to the first rehearsal? And the first rehearsal was like 2 days later at the Union Hall. Okay. So, yeah, that was my first time going to the Union Hall, first time working under a union contract. And I was 26 at the time. I'm just excited to be working, So I did that for about 2.5 years. The day after I came back from my honeymoon, the day I came back, I found out that the band had gotten their 2-week notice.
Oh, no.
But by that time, I had started working as a sub in a lot of different bands, including the Disneyland Band and the saxophone quintet at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was still working there, even though I didn't have that big band job. Then pretty soon I'm working there more and more, subbing for different guys in different bands. And then eventually I got the full-time job, about a year and a half later.
Okay. And what band was the full-time job with?
The Disneyland Band, the Town Square Band, the original.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So just because you referenced it earlier, and I'm not sure people understand, what is a ghost band?
A ghost band. It's when the band leader is no longer with us. Mm-hmm. Like for say Count Basie's band. Count Basie hasn't been with us for many years, but they still call themselves the Count Basie Band, directed under whoever it is at the time.
Okay.
So that's considered a ghost band because the leader is a ghost.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense now. So I'm sure you have some amazing stories. So what's the craziest thing that happened during your tenure as a Disney employee? Like either to you or to someone you saw, or just anything unusual or wild?
Okay. At Disneyland or just in general? Because I've seen some crazy things in general too.
Well, let's start with Disneyland and see where that goes.
Okay. Well, I don't know. It's crazy, but it was, it kind of dark. Okay. When we were doing the Disneyland Big Band, there were a lot of older people, from World War II era, that we come every weekend to, 2 or 3 times a week to dance with us because we were playing 5 nights a week. So there were people there that, we got to know. They would, bring us like cookies and stuff like that. It was, became really a family thing.
Yeah.
And then one night, and it still kind of creeps me out, but we started playing the ballad When I Fall in Love. Mm-hmm. And it's a tenor feature, but the other tenor player was playing it because you have 2 altos, 2 tenors, and a bari in the section. And right after the intro, one of the regulars, I looked over and he was flat on his back on the dance floor,
Oh man.
and he had a heart attack.
Oh no. But this is
And
a patron, right? Not a musician, or do you mean a
the
musician?
patron, yeah, it's one of one of the guys that we got to know really well.
Yeah.
So we stopped, we went off stage, we let the paramedics take care of him. They took him away, and I thought for sure we're not going to be able to finish the night. I mean, everybody's just nobody's into this. I mean, all the dancers just saw their friend being wheeled away.
Yeah.
So, that was like in the middle of the second set, and we still had 2 more sets to go. And the leader said, "Okay, well, they just cleared him up. Let's get back on the stand."
Wow.
And that was just like all of us just going, God, that just seems so disrespectful but yeah, but we finished the night to about 3 couples.
Wow.
Because
Wow.
everybody else left.
Wow. That happens sometimes. You hear stories about people, meeting their maker in the audience during a show or things like that, or even performers sometimes. It's sad that it happens, but I guess there's worse ways to go if you have to go.
Yeah, I mean, he died doing what he loved to do.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's. I'm sorry he did it there. I'm sorry he did it, that night. And I thought it was kind of strange that we continued. But, in the big scheme of things, we're all going to go. It's just he got a chance to do what he loved to do. He and his wife were, like big fans of the band, and, they were surrounded by friends. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a bittersweet story. So were you playing in a special room, or were you in the park somewhere, or like on the street, or were you in that bandstand?
we were actually, the gazebo that was made for the Disneyland band had been removed from the park years before I started there. But there used to be a dance floor called Carnation Plaza.
Oh, and it was right there in the park.
Yeah, it was just right off of the hub where the castle is.
Okay.
In fact, it's still there, except it's called the Princess Fantasy Fair now. And up until right before the park, up until the park closed for the pandemic, they still had big bands there.
Oh, nice.
But they since the pandemic is over, they haven't started that again.
Yeah, that's a shame. And so Disney, you're at Disney, you're working there. Did you were you involved in contract negotiations, or how did you get into the whole aspect of labor relations and labor management, labor advocacy, I should say?
I started because I was really frustrated.
Okay.
I was frustrated because I felt that there wasn't any communication going on between the musicians at the park and the front office, the union. And I thought to myself, well, I can either sit here and complain about it, or I can run for the board. So I decided to run for the board. And when I did that, I realized that there were some communication problems, but it wasn't from the people in the front office. Those guys really cared. So, I started reporting on kind of like a surrogate steward, but we did have a steward, but there was just some communication problems going on. And eventually I became a steward many years later, and we started moving much more aggressively upon the contract violations, and getting the local involved. And then one of my partner in crime at the office is Tammy Noreko.
Yeah.
And she's the secretary treasurer, but when I met her, she was just a staff person at the front. Not just a staff person. She was a really important staff person in the front.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she really showed me around. She said, look, if you want to know what goes on around here, come in and volunteer for an afternoon. And and I thought to myself, I'm going to take her up on that offer.
Yeah.
So I went there, I ended up stuffing envelopes for like 3 hours. But, I got to hear what was going on. I'm just going, man, this place is really busy. I mean, there's so many people calling, people are coming in, there's rehearsals in the back. It was really something. And I realized that no, we have to communicate with them. They're already probably at capacity. We actually have to start doing it. So I became much more involved in the union. And when my kids, this is kind of something that I ever talk about, but because it's a failed story, but that's okay. I don't mind failing at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my kids were going through junior high, and they were talking about cutting the junior high music program from the kids' school. And I just said, no way. I'm not going to allow that to happen. So I went to a lot of school board meetings.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to them a lot about why it's important and why, it will cost them more in funding because they're students that really get a lot out of the band program will be disengaged.
Yeah.
And that there's been so much evidence, so many studies, and I brought that to them, and I kept advocating for it. They decided not to stop the school music program. And when I was doing this, there was the president of the teachers union had been showing up to these meetings too and watching me talk. And he asked me if I would run for school board.
Oh, wonderful.
So I did, and I'm not a politician. I'm a musician, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I didn't know how to campaign at all. And they said, oh, we'll help you. And it's like, even if you help me, I'm not going to know exactly how am I supposed to go out there and do this stuff. So, but I did. And I resigned from the union board so I could spend time dedicated just to that. I didn't make it. That's why it's a failed story.
Mm-hmm.
But I still was very involved with the school district. I became the president of my kids' PTA. We tried to structure much more arts and culture into their classrooms. And it was a good time. I actually enjoyed that a lot. But then I got back on the board, and then the president at the time was at a point where he was thinking about, okay, I've got to have a succession plan. So he brought me on board as the vice president. And during the middle of the pandemic, he said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. Do you have this? And I said, yeah, I got this. And he said, okay, I'm retiring. So I became the president of the union during the pandemic. Yay.
That's amazing. Yeah. So what a time, right? To start leading a labor organization.
Yeah.
But I want to go back. Yeah.
The labor organization where nobody can work.
Exactly. We were one of those sets of workers that were not working at all during the pandemic. Well, most of us were.
Most of us, yeah.
So I do want to go back to say that I don't actually see your story as a failure, right? You didn't win the seat on the board, but you learned a lot from it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you also ended up leading your PTA, and you probably were able to do that because you had built a profile from running. But that's an amazing story of how you took your passion and your feelings about that cutting of the program, and you turned it into something that ended up leading you to do more of that, more and more of that. So, and I love this story because Tammy is another really great friend of ours, and just an amazing labor leader herself. And a lot of the best leaders don't really call themselves leaders, right? They're just there, they're doing it, and they have a way of engaging and building coalitions and building community that is natural to them. And I love the fact that she said, why don't you come and volunteer, right? And she immediately gave you a way to engage and to get an experience. So that's an incredibly powerful story. I love that.
Yeah, she is we call it, we're partners in crime. We're always trying to get into good trouble together.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Um, so, how have you taken? Well, I guess under your leadership, what are some of the issues you're dealing with Orange County musicians now?
Well, Orange County, well, first of all, we're no longer just in Orange County anymore.
Okay.
We took over the territory from for Long Beach. So we're now we're not just about Orange County, but we also represent musicians in Long Beach. But a lot of the issues that we have are the same issues everybody has throughout the country. You know, freelancers don't really have a voice in how they on their working conditions.
Right.
We still maintain the bargaining unit, CBAs. We still do that. That's we have collective bargaining agreements not only with Disney but Pacific Symphony, Long Beach Symphony, Long Beach Ballet, Long Beach Chorale, um, South Coast Symphony. The list goes on. Laguna Playhouse, Pageant of the Masters. So these are all collective bargaining agreements that we have to maintain. One of the things that we have not been very good at, and I know this, which is one of my big pushes as president, is that we have not been very good at communicating with the workers who do that work, and we also are not very good at communicating with the freelancers who don't even know that we exist. That's changing, and it's changing really rapidly for us. Um, since a lot of people know me because of I've been a saxophone player in this area for, you know, 30 plus years. A lot of people know who I am. And I kind of try to use that as a jumping off point as for conversations to have with musicians.
Mhm.
They ask, "Oh, hey, well, how you doing?" I go, "Well, I'm doing this union work now." "Oh, really? What's that like?" And then I start, saying, it's really great. Musicians, when they come together, can start um, really gaining power over the work that they do. We can bargain working conditions, uh, pay rates, all these things. But we can only do that if we are speaking as one voice. I'm not saying that we're not going to have disagreements. We're going to have disagreements. That's, human nature. But when we can come to a consensus and start moving that conversation and how to make our lives better through bargaining, and actually not just bargaining. A lot of people think that the unions, that's all they do. No, we do. The musicians union is not the office. It's not the officers. It's everybody who pays dues. Every musician who works under a collective bargaining agreement, anybody who has joined us, they're all union. They're all part of the union. It's um and that's important for them to realize, because then they realize that now when they're paying dues, it's not the government's money, and it's not the boss's money. It's our money, and we get to decide what to do with it. And that's what gives us power. And because you got to have money to be able to advocate for musicians. I mean, it'd be great if altruistically we didn't have to, but you have to. Or if you're going to be talking to um, like elected officials, we got to be able to spend the time to go there.
Mhm.
And somebody who's be doing that work for you should not be, should be compensated, first of all. But without the things that we can do, like uh, go to board meetings, city council meetings, go to board meetings, go to. I mean, this all takes time, effort, and at the end, it does take money. But the benefit that the musicians, we all get from it, that all of us get from it, is just tremendous.
Yeah, and I think a couple important things to remember, I think, for anybody who's watching who may not understand, like that artists have unions, right? We have our own unions. Actors have their union, musicians have a union,
Writer.
um, and writers have a union, which is a big deal right now.
Yeah.
And so, and we talk about what's called a collective bargaining agreement, and what that means is that if you're on a job and you do not have if you're in an ununionized workplace that has no union contract, right? Then you're on your own, right? Like you can bargain whatever you can get from your superiors and hope that you're bringing enough value that they're going to give you the exchange that you feel is fair. But you have no power alone, right? And so the difference of having a union is that you have a legal collective voice, right? The boss has to sit down and negotiate with you as a group of workers, and you have an equal voice at the table, and that's where the power. And you were able to walk into a job at a young age where workers had already done that, right? They'd unionized at Disneyland, and they had that power and that voice. So that's really important. And now, Edmund, I understand you're now running for a national position as vice president with the entire American Federation of Musicians Union.
Yes, I am.
So what led you to decide to pursue that path?
I slipped and fell and hit my head. No.
That's such a familiar story. No.
Yeah. When we found out, when a bunch of officers found out that the current president, vice president, and secretary treasurer were all stepping down all at the same time, first of all, it kind of caught everybody by surprise.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that I can totally understand why they would. I mean, we've had to fight for shoring up our pension funds through the Bush-Lewis Act, and then, at the beginning of their administration, the union was in really bad financial shape, and then the pandemic. It's like, man, that's about as much as you can take.
Yeah.
So having to get out, I mean, I think everybody understands that, it just wears you out.
Yeah.
When we found out, like the very next day, I started getting calls from people asking me to run for either president or vice president. And I was a little bit taken aback by that. And the reason why is because, I've always thought as being like a medium-sized local. I mean, we're not a big local, but we're as a medium-sized local who have really worked hard to build on our members and get support and everything. That's just what we do and who we are. I mean, I got training when I was still the vice president for organizing through the Tommy Douglas Center, AFL-CIO stuff, and I really enjoyed it. I have total buy-in on that. I know that this is important. I know we can do better. We can do great things if we stick together, and that's the important part. So I've been, kind of organizing the locals. Like in California, we have these bi-weekly meetings so that we could all help each other get through the whole pandemic thing. And then now that we're back from the pandemic, for the most part, we're still meeting and we're still learning from each other. And it's great. It's like a real community. It's like the locals have organized in California. We help each other. We exchange information. And we started doing that also with the Western Conference. And, people started getting excited and going, hey, yeah, we're learning from each other. So I guess that was the reason why people were asking me to run. And Um, I know I couldn't have run for president because I don't want to step away from my local, because I still have a lot of stuff I want to do. And I think it's important work. And if I'm doing the national presence, I wouldn't be able to do it. And
Yeah.
I just can't step away right now. But I can do like what Bruce Fife did, the vice president, and do a lot of the like organizing training. I can do a lot of the officer training. I know how to do that stuff because I've been through it, and I have, enough time on my hands where I can actually get that stuff done. And I think I can do it really effectively. I mean, I know I can. That's the reason why I'm running, is because I want to see this union succeed. I mean, I love this union. I love it because I love the people who work here, all the musicians. I mean, how could you not?
Yeah, I share that as well, and I'm just wondering if you can paint a picture of what that success looks like to you. So, what does it mean if our union succeeds in your view?
Well, there are several things that I think that we would have to take away as a measure through a matrix, which would be like the first thing is get the communication lines going on between all the locals. Not just an email chain, but picking up the phone, talking, having Zoom meetings with all the leaders in those locals, doing all that stuff that we did with the California conference, but on a national scale. Even if it's just regions where, you have one or two locals in the state, get them together with another region that have small locals, and partner with a larger local and start exchanging information about what you're doing. Hey, do you guys have any suggestions on how to do this better? Trying to exchange best practices.
Yeah.
So that's the first one. The second is that, well, besides the training, and because that's also part of the training, is that we have to start training our officers on how to actually be a local, because we're musicians.
Right.
Where if somebody steps in from being like a trumpet player in a band into secretary treasurer's role, you probably don't have any experience doing that. So you need to be trained in how to do that job. What are things are you going to have to be responsible for? We do have something like that, but I think having an in-person, somebody walking you through every single thing, and then somebody you can be a contact point, saying, how do you do this again? And somebody just walking you through. And we sort of have that right now, but it has to be, especially for all the small locals who don't know that this exists, that these resources exist. We got to make sure that those people know.
Yeah.
The next part, I think, is also equally as important, is that since the 1940s, labor laws have been either making it harder for musicians to unionize or targeting specifically musicians, like the Lee Act or the parts of the National Labor Relations Act that specifically attacked musicians' profession to try to restrict on how we can actually do our job and organize. And that has to change. Whether it's the PRO Act, which the PRO Act, if you ever get a chance to read it, I read it the other day and was highlighting stuff, and I'm putting together a white paper so I can share with all my colleagues and why this is important for us to get through. If that means that we tell our members to get on the phone and talk to their elected representatives to get this going, that's what we do, because this needs to pass, because it does have things like workers' misclassification, penalties for that. It enhances penalties for not bargaining in good faith. It tacks on huge penalties if the boss starts retaliating against people who are should be protected for concerted efforts in trying to for union activities, whether it's a strike or organizing for recognition. It also protects those workers who, it gives the employer more incentive to just voluntarily recognize a union rather than having to go through the whole election process. And it also makes it illegal for these employers to do these captive audience meetings where they, pour on as much anti-union stuff and tell them basically lies as facts. And the penalties on those are significant. They're not like they are right now, which is barely, a slap on the wrist.
Yeah.
So
I think,
that's important.
Yeah. And people who are watching who may not be as deeply into the labor culture as we are, the thing that workers need, right, in order to organize or to have any power is a defined employer, right? So
Right.
if you're somebody who is working the front desk at a Marriott hotel, or you are working in an Amazon warehouse, it's pretty clear that you're an employee, right? And but one of the very subtle and kind of pernicious ways that our country in America has tried to kind of erode workers' power is to erode the relationship of the employer and the employee. So somebody who works for Uber, let's say, or Lyft is like, well, I'm an independent contractor and I'm doing this as a side job. There's no real boss that I see or that I'm working for. But there's a huge corporation called Lyft, right? And that erosion started with musicians very, very early, like in the late 70s, where we had some rulings that said, for example, a band like your jazz band that might play at a hotel lounge, and labor law was interpreted to say, oh, well, the hotel's not really the employer. They're just renting out their room. So we were, in a way, the original Uber drivers of America, right? Musicians. And so you're absolutely right. I also wanted to ask you about, because one of the things that I think is pretty basic, but we often overlook it, is like, well, how do you grow and how do you succeed? And I think it involves organizing new workers and organizing new work, right? Getting more people to have power in their workplace with real wages and meaningful respect for their work, and therefore then growing your membership as well.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the ways we are trying to do that is, well, first of all, we are raising the profile of the musicians union in the community. So people who are musicians will see, oh, there's a musicians union. Like, for instance, we hold community concerts. In fact, I'm going to be doing one tonight at our hall, and we open it to the community. And we've had musicians, say, hey, I hear there are concerts going on. I was curious and just showed up, and they see these concerts going on and they think, wow, well, how can I be a part of this? Because I talk about, why the union is important. We have this whole ceremony that we do to honor the jazz legend that we are honoring. And so, we talk about, why it's important, how come, like you said, we lost the power to bargain with the venue and why that's been devastating. But now that we're really moving towards trying to get workers organized, we're trying to get legislation so they can have these employers. We're trying to, we're working together with other musicians, even the ones that aren't our members. We're reaching out to anybody who will listen to us, any musician who will listen to us, to come in and talk to us. If you want to be a member of the union, great. We'd love to have you. We want your voice. Together we're stronger. But if you just want to talk to us, we're more than happy to talk to you. And eventually, I'm hoping that they'll be convinced by what we do, that it's in their best interest to join us in our fight to be able to recognize workers in the musicians who are really workers in the workplace.
Yeah.
And second of all, that they're being totally exploited by these so-called entities that are not their employers. So,
Right.
The more we can move towards that, the easier it is the conversation.
You there?
Yeah, are you here? Okay.
Yeah. Did I
I don't
freeze?
know what happened.
Okay.
Like everything went dark for a second.
Okay.
I think somebody was not liking what I was saying.
Well, welcome back.
Yeah. So we no, so the more that we can actually talk, communicate, and eventually, most musicians are you work long and hard hours between practicing, gigging, and then most of us have to have a day job because those jobs that used to be there in hotels and different places where you could actually be an employee, they're practically gone. And the reason why is because these employers have figured out how to get the most out of as much as they can squeeze out of us. And that squeezing has been choking us for years.
Yeah.
I love it when people say, "Oh, will you please do this gig? I mean, it'll be great exposure for you." And it's like, I'm sorry, man, I can't. People die from exposure.
Yeah, it's true. I love that response. So I want to just highlight that we're still dealing with this today, right? Like, so you had a really positive, I think it's a positive story in California where, for example, and people don't realize this, right? Like Disney has a contract that you worked under at Disneyland, right? But Disney is also employing other types of music, mariachi music for one, and they're saying, "Oh, but these people aren't the contract doesn't apply over here." This is one of the ways that workers have been exploited and taken advantage of, is that the employer says, we want to be selective in terms of who the contract applies to. And for some reason, legally, that's been allowed, right? Except that in California, you guys passed some legislation that actually said, wait a minute, that's not the case, right?
Yeah, it's AB5. And
Okay.
the companion bill was 2257. AB5 established an ABC test to help define who an employee was and who an independent contractor was. So it's very specific. And in fact, that specificity is actually in the PRO Act.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I mean, when I was reading it the other day, goes, man, they took this straight from AB5, so
Yeah.
it was great. So do they have total control over their working conditions? Is the employer part of the? Are they in the same business? For instance, if you're in entertainment and you hire entertainers, they're supposed to be your employees. Whether they're dancers, singers, musicians, they're all in entertainment. Disney is an entertainment entity, a resort. So, and then the last one was, are they in charge of their own schedule? It's like, no, these guys are given set times by the entity. You have to be out here doing this at this time.
Yeah.
So we were about ready to enter into negotiations, and we decided to give this a try and file a grievance that they were not, these musicians were not working. They were working musicians at the park, but they were not employees, which is a violation of our contract. And also we pointed out that it is a violation of AB5. So they said, we had probably one of the best contract negotiations we've ever had. We got more progressive language on our contract than ever. But one of the reasons why is because I opened up the negotiations to all of our members to attend, something that had never been done before, because we were all on Zoom.
Right.
And it was easy for us to do. So, but we set aside the grievance because they said during the negotiation, they said, all right, in order to get this grievance settled, we're going to take it back to our team and see what this is going to look like. So they did. And during negotiation, they said, okay, you're right. We're going to start moving all the independent contractors into employees. That means they'll finally get the hourly wage that everybody else gets, because some of them were getting about half of that. They're also going to be able to get benefits. They're going to get pension contributions. They're going to be able to get unemployment, which during the pandemic for musicians was something that, if it wasn't for the pandemic assistance, a lot of musicians would have ended up destitute. But that was an act of Congress throwing money at a problem that would have to be fixed.
Yeah.
So,
and just to have a side note on that, people don't realize that if you're a musician and this is another one of those invisible or not on the surface effects, right? That people don't think about. If you're an independent contractor, it's probably the same for an Uber or Lyft driver. I don't know. But like when you go to apply for unemployment, it's like, but you haven't really worked, right? Like you're getting cash gigs or whatever. And so the safety net is not there for you. And during the pandemic, they did fix that problem, but it was only during the pandemic. You're right about that.
Yeah. I mean, that program was a one-time deal.
Yeah.
That we've got to fix that big, huge donut hole in our social safety net.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited that you are stepping forward to lead the federation, and there's an election coming up at the convention next month. And how do folks connect with you or find you or learn more about your team and your platform?
Sure. If you go to AFM VPU, so that it stands for American Federation of Musicians Voices, Power, and Unity. Voices, Power, Unity. That's our tag phrase, I guess. But but it's I thought we came up with it, and I have to give Ellen Trainer a huge shout out for that, because she came up with the bulk of just hone it down to those 3 words, and that's what's brilliant. And Ellen is running for IEB on our ticket.
Yeah, and she's another great leader I hope to interview. And then in my experience, I feel like there are people who really understand where our power is, which is always in our collective voice as musicians, right? And so you having musicians show up to a Zoom negotiation, when employers see a room full of workers and not just 2 people from, quote, the union, right? It's such a big difference. And I think that there are folks who really get it. And there are some folks who want to continue with business as usual, where they see the union as themselves or an office. And I really feel like you really get it. And I'm so happy you're running. And I encourage anybody who wants to learn more to go to afmvpu.org or .com. .org. afmvpu.org. Learn more about the Voices, Power, and Unity Coalition if you are a member. And then you can always just go to afm.org to learn more about the American Federation of Musicians Union itself if you're not a member yet and you want to learn more. And you can always connect with Edmund on Facebook. I know you're pretty active on Facebook. And
they can always reach out and email me at edmund@ocmusicians.org.
Edmund, EDMUND @ocmusicians.org.
Right.
Great. Well, I really want to thank you for spending so much time today. We've gone quite a long time here, which is always nice, because whenever the conversation is rich, it always goes over. So that's great. But I know you've got a concert to prepare for tonight. So
yeah, that's one of my other duties. I'm also the sound man. I set up the room.
Wow.
I also break down the room at the end of the night. So I'm going to be there for many, many hours today. But it's great.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. And that's such a great way of connecting to your community, right? Not only just musicians, but other people in your community to say, we're here, we're working musicians, and we live in your community, and welcome to our space.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, like, we did a concert last weekend for Jazz Appreciation Month. And we had somebody from one of the Orange County Supervisor's office come out and give us a recognition, a certificate of appreciation. We had a couple of our people from the Orange County Labor Fed come out and enjoy the concert. And so we're active not just in the local community, but throughout Orange County, Long Beach, and also with elected officials, getting our musicians recognized by them. So when this work goes out for like city park events, union musicians get that work, so they get paid properly, and get pension contributions, Social Security, all workers' comp, all taken care of. So this is important. We're workers.
We are totally workers, and I always stress to my colleagues to use the term working musician. Right, professional has certain associations that people align with artistic merit versus just saying, "Are you working? Or are you not working?" And
those two aren't mutually exclusive.
No, not at all. But I think this idea that we are workers, right? All artists really are workers at the end of the day, and we need to champion that message with not only our colleagues but with those around us, right? And I think some of us, I think a lot of us started our careers by like working under contracts that are legacy contracts, like Broadway contract or the Disney contract. But as you've seen, we also have to organize new work, and it's an ongoing process. We can't just say, oh, well, this is here. I don't know how it got here, but I'm just going to enjoy this contract that I have. We always have to keep working to not only build on those contracts, but get new contracts and organize new workplaces. So again, congratulations on running, and I look forward to hopefully toasting your success in a few weeks now.
I hope so. I mean, you have to be a little crazy to go after that job, but but I'm excited because I think that the team that we have is going to be really dynamic and really pushing the envelope of what we can do. And I'm really excited about that.
That's great. And I'm looking forward to maybe having some of your colleagues on the podcast as well. I know Cale Cummings is running for president from San Francisco, Ellen Trainer from Local 77 in Philadelphia, and we have a lot of others on that slate. And so I'm really excited for you all as a team, and I'm excited for the future of our union. And thank you so much for being here, Edmund. And we'll look forward to seeing you soon and seeing you all next week for another episode.
Yeah. And just remember, together we bargain.
Together we bargain, and you can die from exposure. Those are the two takeaways today.
Yeah. And separate we beg.
Yes. We bargain together or we beg alone.
Yeah.
Yes. Good words to end on. Thank you so much, Edmund, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Take care.
All right. Bye.